So you've done it. You've left your husband in medieval Europe. Maybe he beat you one too many times. Maybe you caught him with the miller's wife. Maybe you just couldn't stand another day of his rotten breath and wandering hands. Congratulations. You've just signed your own death warrant. Not metaphorically, literally. Because in the Middle Ages, a woman without a man wasn't just vulnerable. She was barely human. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moment you walk out that door, you lose everything. Your home, his. Your children, his. Your clothes, your cooking pot, that chicken you raised from a chick, all his. The law is crystal clear on this. A married woman owns nothing. She is property that happens to walk and talk, and property doesn't get to leave. But let's say you do it anyway. You slip out while he's passed out drunk or at the tavern. You take nothing, because taking anything would be theft. And theft means losing a hand. You walk into the night with just the clothes on your back, which technically aren't even yours. Where do you go? Your father's house? He won't take you back. You're damaged goods now. A mouth to feed with no bride price to offset the cost. Your married sister. Her husband would throw you out before you cross the threshold. Taking in a runaway wife is harboring stolen property. Yes, stolen. Because that's what you are now. Your husband owns you like he owns his plow horse, and you've essentially stolen yourself. The church might seem like sanctuary, but think again. The priests who preach about the sanctity of marriage aren't about to shelter a woman who's broken her sacred vows. They'll march you right back to your husband with a lecture about Eve's weakness and wifely obedience. And if you refuse, excommunication, which means when you die, and you will die soon, you're going straight to hell. Do not pass purgatory. Do not collect salvation. The roads aren't safe for a woman alone. Within hours, you'll encounter your first group of travelers. Men, always men. They'll see you walking alone. No husband, no father, no protector, and they'll know exactly what you are. A woman who belongs to no one, which means you're available to everyone. Rape isn't even considered a crime against you anymore. It's a property crime against the man who owns you. And since you've abandoned your owner, there's no crime at all. You can scream for help until your throat bleeds. No one's coming. By nightfall, if you've somehow avoided assault, you need shelter. But innkeepers won't rent to a woman alone. It's assumed you're a prostitute, and harboring prostitutes brings hefty fines. You might find a barn if you're lucky, sharing space with livestock and rats. More likely, you're sleeping rough, exposed to weather, wolves, and worse. The cold seeps through your worn wool dress. Remember, it's not even your dress. Rain soaks you to the skin. Your teeth chatter so hard you bite your tongue. Blood mixes with rainwater in your mouth. Morning brings new problems. You're hungry, but you have no money. You can't work because no one hires women without their husband's permission. You can't beg because vagrancy is illegal. You can't steal because that's a hanging offense. You can't sell your body because prostitution outside designated areas means the pillory. And after what you endured last night, from those merchants who found you hiding in the hedgerow. You'd rather die than let another man touch you. But dying is exactly what you're doing, slowly, publicly, and according to God's own plan. Because this is what happens to women who forget their place. Your stomach cramps from hunger. Your feet bleed from walking. That cough that started yesterday is getting worse. Is it consumption? Plague? Does it matter? Without shelter, food, or medicine, any illness is a death sentence. You might last a week on the roads. 2 if you're exceptionally clever or lucky. You'll try eating grass, bark, anything to fill the gnawing emptiness in your gut. You'll drink from puddles that taste of sheep dung and pray the disease kills you before starvation does. Your hair, once braided neatly under your cap, now hangs in greasy tangles. Lice have found you. They always do. You scratch until you bleed, and the wounds fester in the filth. Your monthly blood comes, and you have no rags, no way to hide it. It runs down your legs, marking you as unclean, unholy, cursed. People cross themselves when they see you. Children throw stones. Dogs bark and snap at your heels. You're becoming feral, more animal than woman, which is exactly what they said would happen to a woman without male guidance. By the second week, if you're still alive, desperation drives you to the only option left, the city. Maybe in London or York or Winchester, you can disappear into the crowds. Find work in a tavern or laundry. Start over. But cities are even more dangerous than the countryside. The moment you enter through the gates, the guards mark you. A woman alone, disheveled, no wedding ring, no traveling papers. You're either a whore or a thief, and they'll be watching. The city stinks worse than anything you've ever experienced. Human waste flows in open gutters. Dead animals rot in the streets. The air is thick with smoke from thousands of fires. You can barely breathe. Your country lungs burn with each toxic breath. You need work immediately, but every potential employer asks the same question. Where's your husband? You lie, say he's dead. They want proof. A death certificate from the parish priest. References from your neighbors. Without them, you're nobody. Worse than nobody. You're suspicious. You try the brothels. At least there you won't need references. But you're too old, too worn, too obviously desperate. The brothel keeper looks you over like livestock at market. Your teeth are rotting from years of coarse bread. Your skin is weathered from field work. Your body shows the damage of multiple pregnancies. She laughs in your face. Even whores have standards. You sleep in alleyways, fighting rats for scraps. Other vagrants, mostly men, size you up each night. How long before one decides you're worth the effort? You stay awake, clutching a broken piece of pottery as a weapon, knowing it won't save you. The city watch finds you eventually. Vagrancy is a crime, punishable by whipping. They strip you to the waist in the public square. The crowd gathers to watch justice served. The first lash splits your skin like overripe fruit. By the 10th, you can't scream anymore. By the 20th, you're barely conscious. They cut you down and dump you outside the city walls with a warning. Return, and it's the brand. A V for vagrant, burned into your forehead, so everyone knows what you are forever. You crawl into a ditch to die, but death is taking its time. Your back is a mess of infected wounds. Fever sets in. You hallucinate your husband finding you. Sometimes saving you. Sometimes finishing what the whip started. You beg imaginary priests for absolution. You see your children the ones you'll never hold again, and wonder if they think you're dead or just evil. If by some miracle you survive the whipping, you're now marked forever. That scarred back brands you as clearly as any hot iron. No decent person will help you. You're criminal scum, deserving of whatever happens next. You might try returning home, crawling back to your husband, begging forgiveness. If he takes you back, and that's a big if, your punishment will be severe. Public humiliation is guaranteed. You'll be paraded through town in your shift, hair shorn, while neighbors throw rotten vegetables and dung. The priest will make you do public penance, kneeling on stone floors until your knees bleed, reciting prayers for forgiveness while the congregation stares. Your husband now has legal justification to beat you whenever he wants. You tried to leave? You're proven untrustworthy. Every bruise is your fault. Every broken bone is God's justice. He might lock you in the cellar for weeks, feeding you bread and water like the animal you've proven yourself to be. He might chain you to the bed. He might invite his friends to use you, since you've already shown yourself to be a whore. The law supports him in all of this. You're his property, returned after attempting escape. He can do whatever he needs to ensure you never run again. Or maybe he doesn't take you back. Maybe he's already moved another woman into your place. Maybe he's glad to be rid of you. Now you're truly finished. A woman refused by her own husband has no place in society. You're not a wife, not a widow, not a maiden. You exist in a category that shouldn't exist. A medieval society has no patience for things that shouldn't exist. You might try to enter a convent, but convents require dowries, and you have nothing. Even if you did, they investigate applicants. A runaway wife? Never. You're not seeking God. You're hiding from your rightful master. The church won't be complicit in your rebellion. You could claim widowhood, move to a distant town where no one knows you. But that requires money for travel, clothes that don't mark you as destitute, and the ability to lie consistently about a husband who never existed. One slip, one person from your past recognizing you, and you're exposed. The punishment for fraud is the pillory at best, hanging at worst. Some desperate women turn to crime, theft, fraud, even murder. But medieval justice is swift and brutal. Get caught stealing bread and you lose a hand. Get caught again and you hang. Women criminals face special humiliation. The scold's bridle for those who dare speak out. The ducking stool for suspected witches. The stake for those convicted of murdering their husbands, because that's not just murder, it's petty treason. Many women in your position simply disappear. They walk into the forest and never come out. Whether they die from exposure, wild animals, or their own hand, no one knows or cares. Sometimes, bodies are found months later, unidentifiable, unmourned. Just another foolish woman who thought she could survive without a man. The truly desperate might try to pass as men, cut their hair, bind their breasts, steal men's clothes. But this is beyond dangerous. If discovered, you're not just a runaway wife. You're an abomination, a violation of God's natural order. The punishment is severe. Public stripping to reveal your deception, whipping, imprisonment, possibly death. And living as a man means constant fear. One illness that requires undressing, one suspicious neighbor, one moment of carelessness, and you're exposed. Plus, you still can't legally work without guild membership, which requires birth records, apprenticeship papers, things you'll never have. Some women become camp followers, trailing after armies, cooking, washing, whoring for soldiers. It's dangerous, degrading work. Disease runs rampant through military camps. Violence is constant. You're at the mercy of men who kill for a living. When the army moves, you walk. When they fight, you wait to see who survives. When they lose, you run or die with them. But at least you eat sometimes. At least you're not alone, even if the company is brutal. You might survive months, even years this way, aging rapidly, body breaking down from abuse and disease. Eventually, you're too old, too sick, too worn to keep up. The army leaves you behind in some foreign field, and you die alone, unnamed, probably unhallowed. Your corpse is picked clean by ravens, who don't care that you once had a name, a home, children who called you mother. The few women who successfully escape their marriages usually have something others don't: money. Noble women might retreat to nunneries they've endowed. Wealthy merchant wives might have hidden coins, jewels they can sell. But for the average peasant woman, the one wearing rough wool and eating barley bread, there's nothing. No savings, no property, no options. You own literally nothing. Even the knowledge in your head, the skills in your hands, are legally your husband's. You can't even sell your expertise as a midwife or herb woman without his permission. And here's the cruelest irony. Even if you had valid reasons for leaving, abuse, adultery, abandonment, the law doesn't care. Your husband could beat you daily, sleep with every woman in the village, gamble away your dowry, and you're still bound to him until death. His death, specifically. Yours doesn't matter. The church preaches that suffering is holy, especially for women. You're Eve's daughter, cursed to submit to your husband as punishment for original sin. Your pain is God's will. Your obedience is your only path to salvation. Fighting against it isn't just illegal, it's heretical. So most women don't leave. They endure. They survive. They bury their rage so deep, it fossilizes in their bones. They watch their daughters married off at 12 and pray. The girl's husband might be kind, knowing kindness is unlikely. They teach their daughters to submit, to endure, to never even dream of leaving, because the alternative isn't freedom. It's death, slow or fast, but always certain. The few historical records we have of women who left their husbands are mostly court records, property disputes where the husband demands his wife's return, like recovering stolen livestock. Criminal proceedings against women caught living under false identities. Death records of vagrants found frozen in barns or floating in rivers. Unknown woman scratched in parish registers. Occasionally, there's a survivor's story, usually a noble woman who managed to secure papal annulment, or a wealthy widow who successfully fought off a forced remarriage. But for everyone who made it, hundreds didn't. Their stories are written in absence, in the spaces between the lines of history where women simply vanish. The message was clear to every woman in medieval Europe. Stay with your husband, or die. Not metaphorically, not eventually. Die cold, hungry, alone and damned. Your suffering in marriage was nothing compared to what waited outside it. At least with a husband, you had a roof, even if he beat you under it. Food, even if he made you beg for it. A name, even if it was never your own. The medieval world was built on hierarchies, and women without men existed outside every single one. You weren't just vulnerable. You were a walking violation of God's order, society structure, and nature's law. Your very existence was an offense that demanded correction, either through return to your rightful place or removal from the world entirely. And the other women wouldn't help you. They couldn't afford to. Helping a runaway wife might mark them as sympathizers, potential runners themselves. Their own husbands would forbid it, punish them for even considering it. They'd watch you starve outside their doors and tell themselves it was God's will, that you brought it on yourself, that their own survival depended on not seeing your suffering, because that was the truth. In a world where women had no legal existence outside of male ownership, solidarity was a luxury none could afford. You need to understand, leaving your husband wasn't just leaving a bad marriage. It was leaving society itself, stepping outside the bounds of human community into a wasteland where you had no identity, no rights, no existence, recognized by law or God. You became a non-person, a ghost haunting the edges of civilization, tolerated nowhere, welcome nowhere, safe nowhere. The psychological torture was almost worse than the physical hardship. You'd been raised from birth to believe your entire purpose was to serve your husband, bear his children, maintain his household. Without that role, who were you? What were you? The identity crisis alone drove women mad. They'd internalized the shame so deeply that even as they starved, they believed they deserved it. Even as they were raped, they thought it was God's punishment for their rebellion. The conditioning was so complete that many women who left eventually begged to return, not just for survival, but for the psychological relief of fitting back into the only role they'd ever known. And if you had left children behind, the guilt was unbearable. They were better off without you, legally and socially. A father without a wife could remarry, hire servants, find ways to care for them. But a mother who abandoned her children was considered the lowest form of life, worse than a murderer. You'd spend your final days knowing your children would grow up hearing stories of their evil mother who chose sin over family. They'd be taught to hate you, to be ashamed of you, to thank God you were gone. If you died on the road, they'd never know. If you lived, they'd wish you hadn't. Some women tried to take their children when they ran. This was kidnapping, punishable by death. Even if you escaped immediate capture, traveling with children made everything harder. They slowed you down, needed food you couldn't provide, shelter you couldn't find. They cried, drawing attention. They got sick without medicine. You'd watch them suffer because of your choice, and many women ended up returning just to save their children, knowing they were trading their own lives for their offspring's survival. The few cases where women successfully gained legal separation were extraordinary. You'd need proof of extreme cruelty, which meant witnesses willing to testify against a man in court. Good luck finding those. Or proof of adultery, which was almost impossible since men's affairs were largely tolerated. Or evidence of abandonment, which required years of absence and still didn't free you to remarry. Even then, you'd need money for legal proceedings, literacy to understand documents, and connections to navigate the system. For a common woman, it was like asking her to fly to the moon. The church courts that handled marriage disputes were run by celibate men who viewed all women as temptresses and wives as particularly dangerous to social order. They'd spend hours lecturing you on your duties while your husband sat smirking, knowing the verdict, before it was spoken. If you were lucky enough to be widowed instead of abandoned, life was marginally better. Widows had some legal recognition, could sometimes keep property, run businesses their husbands left behind. But young widows faced immediate pressure to remarry. Older widows were suspected of witchcraft, and all widows were vulnerable to male relatives claiming their property, forcing them into new marriages, or simply throwing them out. The widow's cap that marked your status also marked you as available prey. Men assumed widows were sexually eager after being without husbands. Rape was common, protection was rare. Many widows remarried quickly, not for love or even companionship, but for basic safety. Better the devil you choose than the devils who choose you. Let's be clear about what marriage meant for medieval women. You were probably married between 12 and 16 to a man chosen by your father. He might be decades older, a stranger, or someone you actively feared. Your consent was neither required nor requested. On your wedding night, you became his property. He could beat you, rape you, starve you, imprison you, and it was all legal. The church would counsel you to be more obedient. Your family would tell you to endure. The law wouldn't even recognize these as crimes. Your body belonged to him. He decided when you had sex, how many children you'd bear, whether you lived or died in childbirth. Your labor belonged to him. Every thread you spun, every ale you brewed, every egg you gathered was his. Your thoughts belonged to him. Speaking against him was insubordination. Having opinions was unwomanly. Reading without permission was suspicious. Your soul belonged to him. The church taught that you reached heaven through your husband's spiritual guidance. Disobeying him was disobeying God. Your eternal salvation literally depended on submission. This wasn't a partnership. It wasn't even slavery, because slaves could sometimes buy freedom. This was complete erasure of personhood, and it was considered God's perfect design. The small acts of rebellion women managed were dangerous, but necessary for sanity. Hiding coins in the flour barrel, visiting sisters without permission, sharing herbs that prevented pregnancy or caused miscarriage. These weren't just acts of defiance, they were capital crimes. Getting caught could mean death, but women did them anyway, creating tiny spaces of autonomy in lives otherwise entirely controlled. These small rebellions were often the only thing keeping women from complete despair. But they also created networks, women who helped each other in secret, passing knowledge, warnings, sometimes aid. These networks were illegal, constantly at risk of betrayal, but they existed. They had to. They were the only thing standing between women and total isolation. But leaving permanently? That required not just courage, but a complete break with everything you'd ever known. Your community, your faith, your identity, your entire understanding of the world. It meant accepting that everyone you'd ever known would consider you dead. Or worse, it meant knowing you'd never see your children again, never be buried in consecrated ground, never be remembered as anything but a cautionary tale. Most women couldn't do it, not because they were weak, but because the cost was literally everything. The infrastructure to support a woman alone simply didn't exist. There were no shelters, no services, no safety nets. The very concept of a woman existing independently was so foreign that language barely had words for it. You were a wife, a widow, a maiden, or a whore. There was no fifth option, and the whore option wasn't what modern people might imagine. Medieval prostitution was regulated, controlled, often brutal. Licensed brothels in cities required registration, health inspections, and fees you couldn't pay. Unlicensed prostitution meant constant arrest, public humiliation, and eventually death from disease or violence. You'd service dozens of men daily for pennies, living in squalor, dying young and unmourned. It wasn't liberation. It was just a different kind of ownership. For some women, madness was the only escape. Whether real mental breakdown from trauma or performed insanity as a kind of protection. Madness at least explained why a woman might leave her proper place. Mad women were beaten, chained, exorcised, but sometimes they were also left alone, considered touched by God or cursed by devils. It was a terrible freedom, but for some, it was the only freedom available. Others chose religion, not the organized church, but personal mysticism, became anchorites, walling themselves into cells attached to churches, living on charity, speaking to no one but God. It was voluntary imprisonment, but at least it was voluntary. They chose their walls rather than having them chosen by husbands. But this required church approval, community support, and again, a dowry. The poor had no such options. They just endured or died. The historical records that survive are mostly about exceptional women, noble ladies who became powerful abbesses, wealthy widows who ran businesses, queens who ruled in their own right. But for every Eleanor of Aquitaine, there were millions of women whose names we'll never know, who lived and died in marriages that were prisons, who never even imagined escape was possible, because it wasn't. Not really. Not for them. The few folk songs and stories that survive from common people tell darker tales. Women transformed into birds to fly away from cruel husbands. Wives who disappeared into forests and became witches. Girls who drowned themselves rather than marry. These weren't entertainment. They were warnings, dreams, and nightmares all at once. They were the only way women could even imagine freedom. Through death or magic. That should tell you everything about how impossible real escape was. Let's talk about what happened when authorities caught you. Because unless you died first, you would be caught. Medieval society was built on everyone knowing everyone else's business. Strangers were suspicious. Women alone were doubly so. Someone would report you, maybe for a reward, maybe from genuine belief they were saving your soul, maybe just from spite. When they brought you back, the humiliation was public and elaborate. You might be paraded through town tied to a cart, wearing only your shift, while people threw filth. The stocks or pillory for days, where anyone could spit on you, grope you, hurt you however they pleased. Your husband might brand you, marking you as his property returned, a hot iron to the face or breast, somewhere visible, so everyone knew what you'd done. The neighbors would shun you forever. Your own family would pretend you didn't exist. The priest would use you as an example in sermons about feminine weakness. Your children would be taught to be ashamed of you. You'd live the rest of your life as a pariah in your own home. Even death wouldn't free you from the shame. Runaway wives who died were often denied Christian burial. Your soul was considered damned, your body unworthy of consecrated ground. You'd be buried at crossroads or in wasteland, places reserved for suicides and criminals. No prayers, no marker, no remembrance. Your name would be struck from family records. It would be as if you never existed, except as a warning to other women who might think of running. The physical punishments were brutal, but the social death was worse. Medieval communities were small, interconnected, dependent on reputation. Once marked as a runaway wife, you were forever outside society's protection. Anyone could hurt you without consequence. Any misfortune was seen as God's justice. You were living proof of what happened to women who defied the natural order. Some husbands would accept their wives back, but make their lives so miserable they'd wish for death. Locked in cellars for months, fed just enough to survive. Beaten daily, but carefully, to cause maximum pain without visible marks that might draw unwanted church attention. Used as unpaid labor, working from dawn to midnight while being reminded constantly of your sin. Forced to watch your husband with other women because your rebellion had forfeited any right to jealousy or hurt. Some men would sell their returned wives' labor to neighbors, essentially renting you out as a slave. You'd work in other households, being reminded daily that you weren't even worthy of your own home. The money went to your husband, of course. You got nothing but exhaustion and humiliation. Others would force their wives into constant pregnancy as punishment. Back-to-back births, no recovery time, no help with the babies. It was a death sentence that looked like marriage. You'd bear child after child until your body gave out, usually by your 30s if you were lucky, 20s if you weren't. Each pregnancy was a Russian roulette, and your husband was loading the gun. The really creative husbands would use psychological torture, telling you your children had died while you were gone, even if they hadn't, convincing neighbors you'd gone mad, so no one would believe anything you said, destroying every possession you'd valued, every small comfort you'd had, making you watch as they were given to your replacement. Because yes, many men took new wives while the first was gone. Bigamy laws be damned. When you returned, you might find another woman in your bed, wearing your clothes, raising your children. You'd become the servant in your own home, watching another woman live your life while you scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots. The law wouldn't help you. You'd abandoned your position. You had no right to reclaim it. If you were pregnant when you left, the baby was your husband's property. He could take it the moment it was born, give it away, sell it to someone needing a servant. You had no say. The law considered the child lucky to be removed from such an immoral mother. You'd never see it again, never know if it lived or died. If you managed to give birth while on the run, the child was illegitimate, a bastard with no legal standing. It couldn't inherit, couldn't join guilds, couldn't marry respectably. Your decision to leave had damned your child before birth. Most women in this position abandoned the babies at church doors, hoping for mercy, but knowing most foundlings died within days. The few who survived grew up marked forever by their mother's sins. The economics of leaving were impossible. A married woman couldn't own property, make contracts, or earn wages without her husband's permission. Any money you might have hidden was legally his. Taking it was theft. Even the clothes on your back were his property. You literally couldn't leave without becoming a criminal. And where would you go? Every piece of land was owned by someone. Sleeping rough meant trespassing. Taking shelter meant breaking and entering. Eating meant stealing. Your very existence outside marriage was inherently criminal. You couldn't even beg legally. Begging required a license, which required residency, which required a male householder to vouch for you. The system was designed to make it impossible for women to exist independently. Every law, every custom, every social structure reinforced the same message. Women belonged to men, and women without men belonged nowhere. The only legitimate reason a woman could leave her husband was if he was impotent, and she could prove it. This required humiliating public trials, where the husband's genitals were examined. Even then, the marriage was annulled, not dissolved. You were returned to your father's control, not freed. And good luck finding another husband when everyone knew why your first marriage ended. Your reputation was destroyed either way. If your husband died under suspicious circumstances after you tried to leave, you were the prime suspect. Husband murder, called petty treason, wasn't just a capital crime. It was punished more severely than regular murder. While men who killed their wives were hanged, women who killed their husbands were burned alive. The law considered it a crime against the natural order, requiring spectacular punishment. Even being accused was essentially a death sentence. The trials were shams. A woman who'd already tried to leave clearly had motive. Evidence was barely required. Testimony from neighbors who'd heard you argue was enough. The torture to extract confession was brutal and sustained. Most women confessed to crimes they hadn't committed just to make it stop. Then they burned anyway. The message to other women was clear. Even thinking about freedom could kill you. The few historical accounts of women who successfully left show they usually had something exceptional. Noble blood that gave them connections. Wealth hidden from before marriage. Family in other countries who might shelter them. Skills so valuable they could work illegally. But most importantly, they had somewhere to go. They didn't just leave. They escaped to something. For the average peasant woman, there was nothing to escape to. Every direction led to the same doom: starvation, violence, or return. The world outside marriage wasn't freedom. It was a wasteland where women couldn't survive. This was by design. The entire structure of medieval society depended on women's unpaid labor in marriage. If women could leave, who would raise the children, tend the sick, manage the household, help with harvests, spin thread, brew ale, tend gardens? The economy would collapse. So every institution, from church to state to community, conspired to make leaving impossible. They didn't need walls or chains. They had something more effective: the absolute certainty that leaving meant death. The Virgin Mary was held up as the female ideal. Virgin, mother, and obedient to God's will. But you couldn't be virgin and mother. You couldn't even be obedient to God without going through your husband first. The contradictions were maddening, but questioning them was heresy. You were supposed to be pure but available, modest but fertile, submissive but capable of running a household. It was impossible, and that was the point. You could never be good enough, so you always deserved whatever suffering you got. The only women with any freedom were the ones outside society entirely. Outlaws, beggars, the insane. And look how they were treated. That was your future, if you left. Medieval art shows it clearly. Women alone are shown as grotesque, demonic, or dead. The message wasn't subtle. Some desperate women turned to magic, or what passed for it. Wise women who lived at village edges, selling herbs and curses. But this was dangerous. Too successful, and you were a witch. Too unsuccessful, and you starved. Either way, you lived in constant fear of accusation. One dead cow, One difficult birth, one suspicious neighbour, and you were burning. The accused witch was almost always a woman alone, widow, spinster, or runaway. Women without male protection were inherently suspicious. They disrupted the natural order just by existing. The witch trials weren't really about magic. They were about control, reminding women what happened when they tried to live outside male authority. Even if you weren't accused of witchcraft, practicing folk medicine without guild membership was illegal. But guilds didn't accept women without their husband's permission. It was another closed loop. You couldn't work legally, so you worked illegally, which made you a criminal, which justified whatever happened to you. The same with brewing ale, spinning thread, any work women had traditionally done. Once you left your husband, it all became illegal. Some women tried to pass as widows in new towns. This required forged documents, consistent lies, and constant fear of discovery. One person from your past recognizing you, and it was over. The punishment for fraud was severe, and impersonating a widow was seen as especially heinous. You were stealing the sympathy and support that real widows deserved. Never mind that you were just trying to survive. The loneliness was crushing. Humans are social creatures, but runaway wives were cut off from all community. No gathering at the well to gossip. No working together during harvest. No celebrating births or mourning deaths together. You a ghost, walking among the living, seen but not acknowledged, present but not included. The psychological toll was devastating. Many women who left ended up taking their own lives, but even this was denied them in death. Suicides couldn't be buried in consecrated ground. Their souls were damned to hell. Their bodies were often dragged through town and buried at crossroads, with stakes through their hearts. It was the final indignity, the last punishment for daring to choose their own fate. The only written records we have from women who left are usually confessions, extracted under torture, or court testimonies. Their own voices, their own stories, were never recorded. History is written by the victors, and in the war between men and women's freedom, we know who won. What we're left with are gaps, silences where women's stories should be. Sometimes, archaeologists find skeletons in unusual places. A woman buried alone in unconsecrated ground. No grave goods, no marker. Who was she? A runaway wife? An accused witch? We'll never know. She took her story to an unmarked grave, and that was exactly what society intended. The medieval world was built on the assumption that women needed constant male supervision. From father to husband to son, a woman was never supposed to be without a male guardian. This wasn't protection. It was imprisonment, with the prison bars made of law, custom, and faith instead of iron. When women stepped outside this system, they didn't find freedom. They found that the entire world was hostile to their existence. Every institution was designed to push them back into place or eliminate them entirely. There was no underground railroad for runaway wives, no secret network of safe houses, no sympathetic abolitionists. There was just the road, the cold, and the certainty of suffering. The few women who survived outside marriage did so by becoming something else entirely. They stopped being women in any social sense. They became outcasts, criminals, mad women, witches. They traded their gender for survival, but it was a devil's bargain. They lived, but they lived as non-people, forever marked by their transgression. Their stories serve as warnings to other women. This is what awaits you outside. Stay with your husband, no matter how cruel. Submit to your fate, no matter how unbearable. Because the alternative isn't liberation. It's annihilation. And perhaps most tragically, many women internalized this message so completely that they enforced it on each other. Mothers prepared daughters for loveless marriages. Older women counseled younger ones to endure abuse. Women testified against other women in witch trials, not from cruelty, but from the terrible knowledge that trying to save each other would only destroy them all. The system was perfect in its cruelty. It turned women into their own prison guards. So when we look back at medieval marriages and wonder why women stayed in horrible situations, remember, they didn't stay because they were weak or stupid or didn't know better. They stayed because leaving meant death. Legal, social, physical, and spiritual death. The cage door was always open, but stepping through it meant stepping off a cliff. The medieval world offered women two choices: marriage or the convent. But even convents required dowries, family connections, and approval from male church authorities. For poor women, there was really only one choice: marriage. And once married, there was no choice at all. Till death do us part wasn't a romantic promise. It was a life sentence with no possibility of parole. The only thing that changed over centuries was the methods of control. The laws became slightly less brutal, the punishments slightly less public, but the fundamental message remained the same well into the modern era. Women who leave their husbands deserve whatever happens to them. It took centuries of struggle, countless women suffering and dying, gradual legal reforms, and massive social upheaval before women gained even the basic right to leave abusive marriages. And in many parts of the world, they still don't have that right. The medieval system casts a long shadow. When we look at these historical horrors, it's tempting to think we've come so far, and we have. But remember that every freedom women have today was bought with the suffering of women who had none. Every right to divorce, to own property, to work, to exist independently, stands on the bones of women who died trying to claim these basic human dignities. Their names are lost to history, but their struggle made our freedom possible. So when you hear people romanticize the past, remember this: for women, the good old days were never good. They were centuries of imprisonment, enforced by law, blessed by the church, and maintained through violence. The past isn't a paradise we've lost. For half of humanity, it was a prison we've only recently begun to escape, and some are still trying to push us back in. The runaway wives of medieval times weren't rebels or feminists in any modern sense. They weren't making political statements. They were just desperate women trying to survive situations that had become unsurvivable. Their failure wasn't personal, it was systemic. The entire world was organized to ensure they couldn't succeed. But still, they tried. And in trying, even in failing, they proved that the human desire for freedom is stronger than any chain. That even when the cost is everything, some people will still choose to pay it rather than live in bondage. Their courage deserves to be remembered, even if their names can't be. Look at the language we still use. Giving away, the bride. Taking, a wife. Maiden name versus married name. The linguistic fossils of a time when marriage was explicitly a transfer of property. We've dressed it up in white dresses and romantic vows. But underneath, the bones of the old system still show through. Medieval marriage wasn't about love. It was about property transfer, political alliance, and sexual access. The woman was the commodity being traded. Her feelings were irrelevant. Her consent was unnecessary. Her happiness wasn't even a consideration. She was livestock with a dowry, valued for her breeding potential and labor capacity. The wedding night wasn't a celebration. It was a legal rape that established ownership. Witnesses sometimes watched to confirm consummation. The blood on the sheets was displayed as proof of virginity and successful transfer of property. The woman's pain and humiliation were just part of the transaction. From that night forward, her body was never her own again. Marital rape wasn't a crime, it was a right. A husband could demand sex whenever he wanted, however he wanted. Refusing was grounds for beating at best, annulment at worst. The church taught that denying your husband was a sin that could damn your soul. So women endured, night after night, year after year, their bodies used and worn down by constant pregnancy and abuse. Contraception was a mortal sin. Abortion was murder. Miscarriage was suspicious, possibly evidence of attempted infanticide. Every pregnancy was a potential death sentence, but avoiding pregnancy was literally a crime against God and husband. Women were trapped in an endless cycle of conception, birth, and recovery, until their bodies finally gave out. The average medieval woman was pregnant or nursing for most of her adult life. 10, 12, 15 pregnancies were common. Half the children died before age 5. The mother often didn't survive either. Childbirth was the leading cause of death for young women. But this was considered God's will, Eve's curse, the natural order of things. When women died in childbirth, they were sometimes denied proper burial because they died unclean, still bleeding, unable to be churched or ritually purified after birth. Even in death, their bodies were considered polluting. Their souls were questionable. They'd failed at their one essential purpose, producing living heirs. The women who survived multiple births often suffered permanent damage, prolapsed uteruses, incontinence, chronic pain, infections that never healed. Medieval medicine offered no help, just more suffering, branded as God's will. These injured women still had to work, still had to submit to their husbands, still had to bear more children. Their damaged bodies were just another cross to bear in lives that were nothing but crosses. And through all this suffering, they were told to be grateful. Grateful for the protection of marriage, grateful for the honor of bearing children, grateful for the spiritual guidance of their husbands, grateful even for the beatings that corrected their naturally sinful nature. The gaslighting was complete and systemic. Some women snapped under the pressure. The historical records mention women who killed their children, burned down their homes, poisoned their husbands. These were treated as examples of female madness, proof that women needed even tighter control. But read between the lines, and you see desperate people pushed beyond human endurance. These weren't crazy women. They were torture victims who finally broke. The punishment for these breaks was spectacular. Women who killed their children were buried alive. Women who burned property were burned themselves. Women who poisoned husbands were boiled alive. The executions were public festivals, reminders to all women of what happened when you stepped out of line. But even these horrors didn't stop some women from trying. That's how unbearable their lives were. The risk of being boiled alive was preferable to another day of marriage. The few female voices that survive from this period are mostly from noble women who could write. Their letters speak of loneliness, fear, constant pregnancy, absent husbands, political marriages to strangers. If this was the experience of privileged women, imagine what it was like for peasants who had no education, no resources, no voice at all. Actually, we don't have to imagine. We have the mortality statistics. We have the court records. We have the skeletons showing malnutrition, repeated breaks from beatings, pelvic damage from too many births. The bones tell the stories the women couldn't. They speak of lives that were nasty, brutish, and short, with the added burden of being female in a world that hated women. The misogyny wasn't subtle. Church fathers wrote extensively about women's inherent evil, weakness, and stupidity. Laws codified women's subhuman status. Art depicted women as temptresses, witches, or breeding stock. Popular songs and stories warned men about female treachery while teaching women their place. The entire culture was organized around the principle that women were dangerous animals that needed constant control. This wasn't just medieval thinking. These ideas persisted for centuries. The laws that trapped medieval women evolved, but didn't disappear. Well into the 20th century, women couldn't own property, sign contracts, or divorce abusive husbands in many countries. The medieval system cast a shadow that we're still climbing out from under. When we talk about runaway wives in medieval times, we're not talking about some distant, barbaric past. We're talking about a system that existed for over 1,000 years, that shaped law and culture in ways that still affect us. The idea that women belong to men, that leaving is betrayal, that abuse is preferable to independence. These medieval concepts still kill women today. Every woman murdered by a partner she tried to leave is a medieval death in modern times. The technology has changed, but the underlying belief system persists in too many places. Women are still property to be controlled, and leaving is still the most dangerous thing they can do. So when we examine these historical horrors, we're not just learning about the past. We're understanding the deep roots of present dangers. The medieval runaway wife, dying alone on a muddy road, is the ancestor of every woman trapped in abuse today. Her story matters because her struggle continues. The names change, the centuries pass, but the fundamental fight remains the same. The right to leave, the right to live, the right to be human rather than property. And for too many women, that fight still isn't won. The medieval system wasn't just cruel, it was comprehensive. Every possible escape route was closed. Family wouldn't help. Church wouldn't shelter. Law wouldn't protect. Community wouldn't accept. Even death offered no escape, since suicide meant eternal damnation. Women were trapped, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. The prison was perfect because it existed in their own minds as much as in the world around them. This is the darkest truth about medieval marriage. It worked. Not for women, obviously, but for the system it was designed to support. It provided free labor, guaranteed reproduction, and social stability. Men got servants, sexual access, and heirs. The church got obedient followers. The state got population growth. Everyone benefited except the women themselves, and their suffering was considered a small price to pay. Actually, it wasn't considered at all. Women's pain was so normalized, it was invisible, like the air everyone breathed or the ground everyone walked on. It was just how things were, had always been, would always be. The idea that women's suffering mattered, that it was wrong, that it should stop. This was literally unthinkable. The concept didn't exist. When modern people romanticize medieval times, they're usually thinking of knights and castles, not the reality of women's lives. They imagine themselves as nobles, not peasants, as men, not women. Because nobody would choose to be a medieval woman if they actually understood what it meant. It meant being property. It meant being trapped. It meant suffering without hope of relief. It meant living your entire life under someone else's control, producing children until you died, working until you dropped, never having a single day that belonged to you. And if you tried to escape, it meant dying alone and unmourned, condemned by God and man alike. This wasn't life. It was animated death. The saddest part is that many women never even imagined it could be different. The system was so total, so universal, so divinely sanctioned, that questioning it was like questioning gravity. This was just how the world worked. Women belonged to men, like cows belong to farmers. The idea of existing independently wasn't just impossible, it was incomprehensible. The mental chains were stronger than any physical ones could be. But some women did imagine different. Some did question, some did run. And even though they failed, even though they died, even though their names are lost, they mattered. Because every woman who tried to escape proved the system wasn't natural or inevitable. It was imposed, and anything imposed can potentially be resisted, even if the resistance seems doomed. These forgotten women were the first cracks in a wall that seemed unbreakable. Today, when women leave abusive relationships, they follow paths, first walked by medieval women who died trying. Every shelter, every divorce law, every protection order exists because centuries of women suffered and died without them. We stand on a mountain of bones, and we owe it to those bones to remember why they're there. The medieval women who tried to leave knew they would probably die, but they went anyway. That's not stupidity. That's courage beyond modern comprehension. They chose death over submission. They chose starvation over slavery. They chose damnation over degradation. They looked at a world entirely hostile to their existence and said, I would rather die free than live owned. Most of them did die, but their defiance echoed through centuries, inspiring other women, creating hairline fractures in the patriarchal structure that eventually, gradually, painfully became large enough for some women to escape through. We are their descendants, not by blood, but by struggle. Every right we have, they died trying to claim. So we remember them, nameless as they are, faceless as they've become. We remember the runaway wives who died on medieval roads, alone but unbroken. We remember the women who chose death over submission. We remember those who tried to escape and failed because their failure taught us what needed to change. We remember them when we vote, when we work, when we leave relationships that don't serve us. We remember them when we own property, sign contracts, exist as legal persons rather than property. We remember them when we choose our own lives rather than having them chosen for us. Their ghosts walk with us. These medieval women who died for freedoms they could barely imagine. Every choice we freely make honors their memory. Every door we walk through that they died trying to open is a monument to their courage. They didn't live to see freedom, but they died believing it was worth dying for. And in the end, they were right. It just took centuries longer than they could have imagined. The medieval world is gone, but its shadows linger in laws that still favor men, in cultures that still treat women as property, in religions that still preach female submission, in families that still prefer sons, in wages that still aren't equal, in violence that still targets women who leave. The medieval system evolved, but didn't die. It put on modern clothes, learned new languages, adapted to new technologies. But underneath, the same ancient hatred of female autonomy persists, the same fear of women uncontrolled, the same rage when property tries to become human. This is why the story of medieval runaway wives matters, not as ancient history, but as present warning. The forces that killed them still exist, just wearing different masks. The struggle they began isn't over. The price of freedom is still being paid, just in different currency. But here's what's changed. Now we know their stories. Now we can name the system that killed them. Now we can see the bars of the cage, even when they're painted pretty colors. Now we can warn each other, support each other, save each other. Now when women run, sometimes they survive. Sometimes they thrive. Sometimes they build new lives that medieval women could never have imagined. And every woman who successfully leaves an abusive situation doesn't just save herself. She completes a journey that medieval women began. She proves that what was once impossible is now possible. She shows that the walls that seemed eternal can fall. She carries forward a torch that's been passed through centuries of darkness, kept alive by women who died rather than let it go out. The medieval runaway wife died alone on a muddy road, but her spirit lives in every woman who refuses to be owned. Her courage echoes in every woman who chooses freedom over safety. Her sacrifice is honored every time a woman leaves and lives. She didn't die for nothing. She died for something that wouldn't exist for centuries, but that she somehow believed was worth dying for anyway. She died for the radical idea that women are human beings who deserve to exist on their own terms. And slowly, painfully, century by century, that idea is winning. Not everywhere, not for everyone, not yet, but more than ever before, more than medieval women could have dreamed. The road they died on leads somewhere now. It leads to shelters and support groups. It leads to divorce lawyers and restraining orders. It leads to jobs that pay enough to live on, apartments that women can rent alone, bank accounts they control. It leads to lives that medieval women died, believing must exist somewhere, even if they never found them. We found them because they looked first. We live because they died trying. We're free because they proved that freedom was worth everything, even when it cost everything. Their bones are dust. Their names are lost. Their stories are mostly untold. But their struggle shaped the world we live in. Every free woman is their monument. Every choice we make is their epitaph. Every life we live on our own terms is their resurrection. They're not forgotten. They live in us, in our freedom, in our refusal to go back to the world they died trying to leave. The medieval world had many weapons against women who tried to leave. Law, religion, economics, violence, social ostracism, psychological torture. But its greatest weapon was hopelessness, the total absence of alternatives, the complete impossibility of survival outside the system. Women stayed not because they accepted their fate, but because they couldn't imagine any other fate being possible. This hopelessness was carefully cultivated. Girls were raised from birth to believe their only value was in marriage and motherhood. They were denied education that might let them imagine alternatives. They were kept ignorant of their own capabilities. They were taught that suffering was holy, that submission was virtue, that wanting anything else was sin. By the time they were old enough to question, they were already married, already pregnant, already trapped. The system got them before they even knew there was a system to resist. This is why teenage marriage was so common. Not just for fertility or alliance, but for control. A 12-year-old bride couldn't conceive of resistance. By the time she was old enough to understand her situation, she had 6 children and no options. The trap was sprung before she even knew she was in a trap. The few women who saw through it, who understood their imprisonment, faced an impossible choice: submit and die slowly of despair, or rebel and die quickly of starvation. Most chose slow death. It seemed less violent, less shameful, less damning, but it was still death, just stretched over decades instead of days. Every medieval wife was dying from the moment she married, dying of exhaustion, of childbirth, of despair, of violence, of simple wear. Their lives were exercises in endurance, seeing how much suffering a human body could take before it finally stopped. And when it stopped, when they finally died, they were replaced. Another girl, another marriage, another slow death beginning. The system didn't even pause. It just consumed women and moved on. An endless appetite that was never satisfied, never questioned, never resisted except by the few who chose fast death over slow. But even slow death was resistance in its way. Every woman who endured, who survived another day, who raised daughters who might have better lives, was fighting in the only way available. They couldn't win, but they could persist. They could pass on wisdom, warnings, tiny acts of defiance. They could plant seeds of doubt that might bloom generations later. The medieval system seemed eternal, but it wasn't. It was maintained through constant violence, constant vigilance, constant reinforcement. Because somewhere deep down, those in power knew it was unnatural. Natural systems don't require such brutal enforcement. The amount of energy spent keeping women trapped reveals how desperately they wanted to escape. Every law against women's autonomy was admission that women wanted autonomy. Every punishment for leaving was proof that women wanted to leave. Every sermon about female submission was evidence that women resisted submission. The system told on itself with its own brutality. The very existence of runaway wives, however few, however doomed, proved the system was fighting a war it could only win through total annihilation of opposition. And it tried. God, how it tried. But you can't kill an idea, even if you kill everyone who has it. The idea of freedom persisted, passing from mother to daughter in whispers, in warnings, in dreams. It survived in songs about birds flying away, in stories about shape-shifting women who became wolves, in legends about saints who chose God over marriage and were martyred for it. The idea of female freedom survived disguised as fantasy, as heresy, as madness. But it survived. And eventually, slowly, painfully, it grew strong enough to challenge the system that tried to kill it. Not in medieval times. Those women died without seeing change. But their deaths weren't meaningless. They were necessary steps in a journey that would take centuries. Every woman who died, trying to leave, proved the system was killable, even as it killed her. The medieval church taught that women's suffering was punishment for Eve's sin, that every painful birth, every beating, every rape was justified by original sin. Women deserved their pain because the first woman had dared to seek knowledge. Think about that message. The foundational myth was that female curiosity, female agency, female choice had damned humanity. And women were paying for it forever. The theological prison was as tight as the legal one. When women suffered, they were told it was God's will. When they tried to escape suffering, they were defying God. There was no legitimate way to resist, because resistance itself was sin. The church offered no comfort, only more chains painted gold and called holy. Priests, all male, preached about female evil, while living off tithes paid largely by women's labor. Monks, safely celibate, wrote treatises on the dangers of female sexuality they'd never experienced. Bishops, politically powerful, upheld laws that kept women enslaved, while calling it divine order. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but pointing it out was heresy. So women suffered in silence, told their pain was holy, their submission sacred, their imprisonment God's own design. Some found comfort in female saints, in the Virgin Mary, in the few religious spaces that acknowledged female holiness. But even these were controlled by male clergy, interpreted through male theology, restricted by male authority. Women could be holy only through suffering, sacrifice, submission. Never through strength, independence, or resistance. The convents that offered some women escape from marriage were still prisons, just with different bars. Nuns lived under strict male authority, following rules written by men, confined to cloisters, controlled as tightly as any wife. The sexual control was different, but just as absolute. Instead of being one man's property, they were God's property, which meant the church's property, which meant men's property, with extra steps. The few powerful abbesses who ran wealthy convents were exceptions that proved the rule. They had authority only because they were useful to male power structures. The moment they became inconvenient, they were replaced, reformed, or dissolved. The medieval world offered women no good choices, only different flavors of imprisonment. But here's what the system didn't count on. Suffering creates solidarity. Oppression breeds resistance. Even in the darkest times, women found ways to connect, to support each other, to share what little power they had. The birthing chamber was one of the few spaces men couldn't enter. Women attended each other in labor, sharing knowledge, comfort, and sometimes secrets. Midwives held power over life and death, knowledge of herbs that could heal or harm, end pregnancies, or ease suffering. This female knowledge was dangerous, constantly under suspicion, often criminalized. But it persisted because women needed it to survive. The washing streams, the market squares, the church steps, anywhere women gathered, networks formed. Information passed, warnings shared, small rebellions planned. These networks were informal, invisible, constantly at risk. But they existed. They had to. They were the only thing standing between women and total isolation. Through these networks, women learned which husbands were violent, which priests were predatory, which herbs prevented pregnancy, which routes were safest for travel. They learned to read danger, to navigate violence, to survive systems designed to kill them. This knowledge wasn't written down. It couldn't be. It was passed woman to woman, generation to generation, an oral tradition of survival that no man ever heard, but men suspected. The constant fear of female conspiracy, the obsession with female gossip, the laws against female gathering, all reveal male knowledge that women were not as conquered as they seemed. The witch hunts were partly about this fear, women meeting together, sharing knowledge, supporting each other. This was dangerous. It had to be stopped. So they called it witchcraft and burned it out. But it always grew back, like weeds through cobblestones, because women's need for each other was stronger than fear. The medieval world tried to isolate women, to make them compete for male approval, to turn them against each other. And it partially succeeded. Women did police each other, did enforce patriarchal rules, did betray each other. The system was brilliant at making oppressed people oppress each other. But not entirely, not always. Sometimes women chose each other over the system. Sometimes they hid each other's bruises, lied about each other's whereabouts, shared food when husbands withheld it. Sometimes they helped each other survive even when helping was dangerous. These small acts of solidarity were revolution in miniature. They proved women could organize, could resist, could choose loyalty to each other over obedience to men. They were sparks that would eventually become fire, but not for centuries, not in time to save the women who struck them. The medieval women who helped each other did so, knowing they'd never see liberation. They did it anyway, because solidarity was the only freedom available, the ability to choose to help another woman, to ease another's suffering, to share what little you had. This was the only agency they could exercise. So they exercised it, carefully, quietly, constantly. Every shared herb, every whispered warning, every moment of comfort was resistance. Small, doomed, but essential. The foundation of every feminist movement that would come later was laid in medieval washing streams by women who would have been burned for witchcraft if they'd been caught. The techniques of control that medieval men perfected are still used today. Different forms, same function. Isolation from support networks, economic dependence, religious justification for submission, social shame for leaving, legal systems that favor men, violence disguised as protection. The playbook hasn't changed much, just gotten subtler. Modern women who recognize these patterns can thank medieval women who experienced them first, named them in whispers, passed down warnings that eventually became wisdom. The medieval system of male ownership wasn't unique to Europe. Similar systems existed worldwide, trapping women in marriages they couldn't leave, lives they couldn't control. The details varied, but the fundamental structure was the same. Women as property, marriage as transfer of ownership, leaving as death sentence. This near universal oppression of women wasn't natural or inevitable. It was designed, implemented, and maintained through tremendous effort. The amount of violence required to keep half of humanity enslaved reveals how unnatural the system was. Natural hierarchies don't require such brutal enforcement. The medieval period wasn't dark because it lacked technology or knowledge. It was dark because it perfected the technology of human oppression, particularly of women. The castles and cathedrals we admire were built on the bones of women who died in childbirth, exhaustion, and despair. The illuminated manuscripts were created in monasteries that upheld women's imprisonment. The celebrated knights were professional killers who raped and pillaged as reward for service. The entire medieval culture we romanticize was built on female suffering, so normalized it was invisible. When we talk about medieval achievements, we should remember their cost. Every cathedral was built by communities that burned women as witches. Every castle housed women who couldn't leave. Every celebrated king had wives who died in childbirth or were murdered for not producing sons. Every romantic poem about courtly love was written in a world where actual women had no choice in who they loved. The beauty of medieval art and architecture is real, but it's beauty built on horror. We can admire the craftsmanship while remembering the craftsmen's wives who had no names, no rights, no escape. We can study the philosophy while recognizing it justified female slavery. We can appreciate the history while centering the experiences of those it tried to erase. Medieval women's stories matter because they're the majority of medieval people. But history focused on kings and battles, not the daily struggles of ordinary women. Their lives were considered too common, too unimportant, too female to record. But they were the ones who kept civilization going. They birthed and raised the entire population. They produced food, clothing, goods. They maintained households, communities, cultures. They did the essential work that made everything else possible. And they did it without recognition, rights, or reward. They were the invisible foundation everything rested on. When that foundation shook, when women tried to leave, the entire system panicked. That's why the response was so brutal. Not because runaway wives were dangerous, but because they revealed how fragile male power really was. If women could leave, if they could survive independently, if they could choose their own lives, then male superiority was a lie. The entire justification for the system would collapse. So women who tried to leave had to be destroyed, publicly, brutally, completely, not just as punishment, but as propaganda. Their destruction was a message to all women. This is what happens when you forget your place. But the message also revealed the truth. If women were naturally inferior, naturally dependent, naturally submissive, they wouldn't need such violent reminders. The brutality of the enforcement revealed the lie of natural hierarchy. Women weren't staying because they were naturally suited to submission. They were staying because leaving meant death. Remove the death sentence, and they'd leave. The system knew this. That's why it never removed the death sentence, until very recently, historically speaking. And look what happened when it did. Women left, in droves. The moment it became survivable to leave bad marriages, women did. The moment they could work legally, they did. The moment they could vote, own property, exist independently, they did. Everything medieval men said about female nature was proven wrong the moment the chains came off. Women weren't naturally dependent. They were forcibly made dependent. They weren't naturally submissive. They were brutally forced into submission. They weren't naturally suited to domestic servitude. They were given no other options. The speed with which women claimed freedom, once it became available, proves how desperately they'd always wanted it. The medieval system wasn't protecting women or honoring their nature. It was suppressing a force that would reshape the world once released. And that force had been building pressure for 1,000 years, fed by every woman who died trying to be free. The explosion of female achievement once barriers fell reveals what was lost during centuries of suppression. How much art, science, philosophy, innovation died with women who were never allowed to develop their gifts. How much human potential was wasted in forced pregnancy and domestic servitude. How much genius was beaten out of girls before it could bloom. We'll never know. Those losses are incalculable. Entire dimensions of human achievement were strangled in the cradle because half of humanity was enslaved. The medieval world impoverished itself by imprisoning women, but it was so invested in male supremacy that it preferred poverty to equality. The legacy of medieval marriage isn't just historical. It shaped laws that governed our grandmothers. It influenced religions that still preach female submission. It created cultural assumptions we're still unpacking. The idea that women should sacrifice for family, that leaving is selfish, that abuse should be endured for the children, that male violence is natural, that female independence is unnatural. These are medieval ideas wearing modern clothes. When people say feminism goes too far, they're saying medieval values didn't go far enough. When they romanticize traditional marriage, they're romanticizing female slavery. When they advocate for female submission, they're advocating for the system that killed countless women whose only crime was wanting to be human. The medieval world is gone, but its ghosts haunt us. Every woman murdered by a partner she tried to leave is killed by medieval logic. Every law restricting female autonomy has medieval roots. Every religion preaching female submission is maintaining medieval control. Every culture that values sons over daughters is perpetuating medieval misogyny. These aren't remnants of the past. They're the past refusing to die, adapting to modern times, but maintaining ancient hatreds. The struggle that began with medieval women trying to leave hasn't ended. It's evolved, but it continues. And it will continue until the last chains are broken, the last laws reformed, the last minds changed, until every woman can leave any situation without risking death, until female autonomy is unquestioned, until the medieval world is truly, finally dead. The women who died on medieval roads didn't die for nothing. They died for a future they couldn't see, but somehow believed in. They died for daughters they'd never meet, for freedoms they couldn't imagine, for a world that didn't exist yet, but that they knew should exist. They died for us, and we live for them. Every choice we freely make honors their sacrifice. Every door we walk through that they couldn't is a victory they earned with blood. Every right we exercise is a right they died trying to claim. We are their dreams made flesh, their hopes realized, their struggles vindicated. They didn't live to see freedom, but they died to make it possible. And that's the greatest tragedy and triumph of the medieval runaway wife. She failed completely and succeeded ultimately. She died achieving nothing and everything. She lost her life and won the future. Her bones are dust, but her spirit is indomitable. She was defeated, but her cause won. She remains nameless, but not forgotten. Powerless, but ultimately victorious. She lost every battle, but won the war. She died on a muddy road, but she lives in every woman who walks free. When we remember medieval runaway wives, we're not just remembering history, we're remembering revolution. The first, doomed, essential revolution. The one that failed so completely it took centuries to recover, but also the one that planted seeds that nothing could kill. The revolution that said, women are human, that freedom is worth everything, that even if you die trying matters. That revolution continues. It's not won. Large parts of the world still operate on medieval principles. Women still die for leaving, but more survive than ever before. More escape, more life free. The trajectory is clear, even if the journey is far from over. The medieval runaway wives started something they couldn't finish. We're still finishing it. And someday, maybe not soon, but someday, it will be finished. Every woman will be free to leave any situation without fear. Every girl will grow up knowing she owns herself. Every choice will be real choice, not coercion disguised as consent. That world doesn't exist yet, but it's closer than it's ever been. And it's built on the bones of medieval women who died, believing it was possible. They never saw it, but they saw truly. It was possible. It is possible. It will be finished when the last law falls, the last mind changes, the last chain breaks. When the medieval world is finally, truly dead and can never resurrect itself. When no woman anywhere fears leaving. When no girl grows up believing she's property. When the idea of female ownership becomes as absurd as believing the earth is flat. That day will come, not because it's inevitable, but because women keep fighting for it, generation after generation, building on the bones of those who came first. The medieval runaway wives were the first casualties in a war that's still being fought. But they weren't just casualties. They were pioneers. They walked into the wilderness of female independence when there were no maps, no paths, no destinations. They died, not knowing if anyone would follow. But we did follow. Millions of us. And we're still following, still walking the paths they died trying to create. Their footsteps are invisible, but indelible. Every woman who leaves an abusive marriage walks in their footsteps. Every girl who chooses education over early marriage follows their lead. Every law protecting female autonomy is built on their bones. Every shelter for abused women is their monument. Every freely chosen life is their vindication. They died for freedoms they couldn't even name, but we can name them now. The right to divorce, the right to work, the right to own property, the right to refuse sex, the right to control reproduction, the right to exist independently, the right to be human rather than property. These rights seem basic now, but medieval women died without any of them. They died in a world where these concepts didn't even exist, where suggesting them would be heresy, madness, or both. But somehow, they knew something was wrong. They couldn't articulate it in rights language or feminist theory. They just knew that being owned was unbearable, even if they'd been taught it was natural. They knew that marriage as practiced was wrong, even if everyone said it was sacred. They knew they deserved something better, even if they couldn't imagine what better looked like. That knowledge, that bone-deep certainty that the system was wrong, drove them onto roads where they knew they'd die. They chose death over accepting the lie. They chose starvation over slavery. They chose damnation over degradation. And in choosing, even though they lost everything, they proved that choice was possible. That's what the system feared most. Not successful escape, but the attempt itself. Every woman who tried to leave, no matter how doomed, proved that women weren't naturally submissive. They had to be forced into submission. And that proof was dangerous. It suggested that the entire structure of medieval society was built on violence rather than nature, that male supremacy was maintained through force rather than inherent superiority, that women stayed not because they wanted to, but because they had to. This was the secret the system would kill to protect. That female submission was manufactured, not natural. That male dominance was fragile, not eternal. That the whole elaborate structure of laws, customs, and religious justifications was necessary precisely because women didn't naturally accept their place. If they did, none of that apparatus would be needed. The violence used against runaway wives wasn't just punishment. It was theatre, designed to convince everyone that the system was necessary, natural, and eternal. But the very need for such theatre proved the opposite. Natural systems don't require propaganda. Eternal truths don't need violent enforcement. The brutality revealed the lie. And some women saw through it. Not many. Not enough to matter immediately, but some. And they passed that seeing to their daughters in careful whispers. They taught skepticism disguised as submission. They planted doubt wrapped in obedience. They transmitted resistance through the only channels available: lullabies, stories, warnings. The folklore of medieval women is full of transformation. Women becoming birds, trees, streams, anything but wives. These weren't just fantasies. They were dreams of escape so desperate that they transcended human form. When being a woman meant being property, the only freedom was to stop being a woman altogether. But transformation in stories was death in reality. Women who tried to change their circumstances found that the only transformation available was from living property to dead rebel. The system offered no middle ground, no room for negotiation, no possibility of reform. You were either a wife or you were nothing. And nothing, for many women, started to look preferable to the something they were forced to be. The accounts we have suggest that many runaway wives knew they would die. They left anyway. This wasn't ignorance or delusion. It was a calculation that death was preferable to continued existence as property. When your life is unbearable, death becomes logical. When your existence is negation, non-existence becomes affirmation. These women weren't suicidal in the modern sense. They were making rational choices in irrational circumstances. They were choosing the only freedom available, the freedom to die on their own terms rather than live on someone else's. It was a terrible freedom, but it was theirs, the last thing they could claim as their own, the only choice no one could take from them. And they chose it, knowing the cost, because the cost of not choosing was higher. Living death versus actual death, slow torture versus quick execution, decades of rape versus days of starvation. The calculation was brutal but clear, and thousands of women made it, walked out into the night, and never came back. Their bodies were found in forests, rivers, ditches, or never found at all, dissolved into earth without markers or memory. But their choice echoed through centuries. Each woman who left proved that some things were worse than death, that survival wasn't worth any price, that there were limits to human endurance, that women, despite everything they'd been taught, would choose death over absolute submission. This was revolutionary. In a world that insisted female submission was holy, natural, and eternal, these women proved it was none of those things. They proved women would rather die than accept it. That truth was so dangerous that every institution in medieval society mobilized to suppress it. But truth, once seen, can't be unseen. It spreads like ink in water, invisible but indelible. The women who saw it couldn't unlearn it. They carried it like a disease or a gift, depending on your perspective. They infected their daughters with doubt. They passed on the virus of questioning. They created genealogies of resistance that survived even when the resistors didn't. These genealogies were mostly invisible, maintained in private spaces where men never looked. In birthing rooms, where women screamed truths they couldn't speak elsewhere. In kitchens, where recipes were seasoned with rage. In gardens, where herbs grew that men didn't know about. In sewing circles, where patterns concealed plans. Women's spaces became revolutionary spaces, not because women were plotting revolution, but because they were remembering women who left, remembering what happened to them, remembering that leaving was possible, even if it was fatal, remembering that some women chose death over submission. These memories were dangerous cargo, passed from mother to daughter like contraband. Each generation of women knew a little more, doubted a little more, questioned a little more. The foundation of female submission developed cracks that widened imperceptibly over centuries, until eventually, finally, explosively, it shattered. But that shattering was millennia in the making. Every medieval woman who died trying to leave contributed to the pressure that eventually broke the system. They were geological forces, invisible in their own time, but ultimately irresistible. They moved history the way water moves mountains, slowly, persistently, inevitably. The medieval church was particularly invested in keeping women trapped, not just because it supported social order, but because female independence threatened theological foundations. If women could choose, if they had agency, if they weren't naturally subordinate, then Eve's curse was questionable. And if Eve's curse was questionable, then original sin was questionable. And if original sin was questionable, then the entire Christian justification for suffering, hierarchy, and male supremacy collapsed. So runaway wives weren't just social rebels. They were theological heretics. Their very existence suggested that God's order might be man's invention, that divine will might be male will, dressed in holy language, that scripture might be politics, disguised as prophecy. These were thoughts that could burn the world down. So they burned women instead. The witch hunts were partly about this. Women who lived outside male authority were inherently suspicious. They suggested alternatives were possible. They proved women could survive, even thrive, without men. They had knowledge, power, independence that wasn't supposed to exist. So they were labeled evil, unnatural, satanic. They were tortured into confessing impossible crimes. They were burned as warnings to other women. This is what happens when you claim autonomy. But the witch hunts also revealed something important. If women were so naturally weak, dependent, and submissive, where did witches get their power? If female nature was entirely subordinate, how could women threaten the entire social order? The contradiction was obvious to anyone who looked. Witches were simultaneously too powerful to tolerate and too weak to resist. They were nothing and everything, powerless and terrifying, subhuman and supernatural. The logical impossibility of witches revealed the logical impossibility of the entire system. But logic had never been the point. Control was the point, and control required whatever contradictions were necessary. Women were weak, but dangerous, stupid, but cunning, dependent, but threatening, nothing but everything. The contradictions didn't matter as long as the control worked, and for centuries, it did work. The system held through pure violence, justified by twisted logic, sanctified by corrupted theology. Women stayed trapped, not because the system made sense, but because leaving meant death. When that changed, when leaving became survivable, the entire edifice collapsed with stunning speed. Millennia of justifications evaporated in decades. Eternal truths became obvious lies. Natural law became exposed as male preference. The whole elaborate structure revealed itself as a prison, built on violence and maintained through terror. Nothing natural about it, nothing eternal about it, nothing sacred about it. Just force and fear, dressed up as philosophy and theology. The medieval women who died trying to escape were right about everything except timing. They were right that the system was wrong, right that freedom was possible, right that women deserved autonomy. They were just centuries too early. They saw a future that wouldn't exist for generations and died trying to reach it. But their reaching created the possibility. Their deaths were seeds that took centuries to grow, but eventually bloomed into freedoms they could barely imagine. Every right women have today grows from soil fertilized by their bones. They died for rights they couldn't name, to create a world they couldn't see. And we live in that world, imperfect as it is. We walk through doors they died trying to open. We make choices they died trying to claim. We live lives they died believing were possible. We are their impossible dreams made real. The world they died for exists now, or at least exists more than it ever has before. Women can leave marriages, can own property, can work, can vote, can exist independently, can choose their own lives. These basic freedoms that medieval women died without are now so common, we forget their miracles. We forget that for most of history, they were impossible. We forget that women died by the thousands trying to claim what we take for granted. But we shouldn't forget. We should remember that our freedoms are new, fragile, and constantly under attack. Forces that want to push women back into medieval conditions still exist. They've never stopped existing. They've just gotten better at hiding. They wrap their medieval values in modern language. They use economics instead of law. They use manipulation instead of force. But the goal remains the same: female submission, male supremacy, women as property. The medieval world isn't as far away as we'd like to think. For millions of women worldwide, it's not history, it's daily reality. They still can't leave, still can't choose, still die, trying to escape. The medieval system just relocated, adapted, survived. It speaks different languages, worships different gods, uses different justifications. But it's the same system that killed medieval runaway wives. Same structure, same violence, same deadly choice between submission and death. For these women, the medieval period never ended. They're still fighting battles their sisters lost centuries ago. They're still dying for freedoms that should be basic human rights. They're still treated as property, controlled through violence, trapped in marriages that are prisons. Their stories don't make headlines because they're too common. Their deaths don't shock because they're too familiar. Their struggles don't inspire movements because they're too overwhelming. But they're the inheritors of medieval runaway wives, facing the same impossible choices, making the same desperate calculations, dying the same preventable deaths. When we remember medieval women who died trying to leave, we're not just remembering history, we're acknowledging present reality for millions of women. We're recognizing that the struggle continues, that the medieval world still claims victims, that freedom remains a privilege rather than a right. We're admitting that the victory isn't won, the journey isn't over, the price is still being paid, and we're committing to continue the fight they started, to finish what they died trying to do, to create the world they imagined but never saw. That world where every woman owns herself, where leaving is always possible, where choice is real, where freedom doesn't require martyrdom, where the medieval world is finally, completely, irrevocably dead. That world doesn't fully exist yet, but it's closer than ever. And every step toward it honors the women who took the first steps and didn't survive them. The medieval runaway wives didn't die for nothing. They died for everything. They died for a future they created by dying for it. They died so we could live free. Their names are lost, but their legacy isn't. Every free woman is their legacy. Every choice freely made is their monument. Every escape that succeeds is their victory. Every life lived in freedom is their resurrection. They are not forgotten. They live in us, in our freedoms, in our refusals to go back. They failed, but their failure was the beginning of our success. They lost everything, but their loss became our gain. They died alone, but their deaths created the possibility of solidarity. They were defeated, but their defeat was temporary. We are their victory, delayed, but not denied. The medieval world tried to erase them, to make them nothing, to destroy even the memory of their existence. But it failed. They exist in every woman who refuses to be owned. They speak through every woman who demands equality. They live in every woman who claims her own life. They can't be erased because they became part of history's DNA, invisible but essential, forgotten but undying. The runaway wives of medieval times were the first martyrs of female freedom. They didn't mean to be martyrs. They just wanted to be free. But in a world where female freedom was impossible, wanting it was martyrdom. They paid the ultimate price for the crime of believing they deserved to exist on their own terms. That belief killed them, but it couldn't die with them. It spread like wildfire through centuries, inspiring other women, creating possibilities, slowly changing the world. Today, when a woman leaves an abusive relationship, she completes a journey medieval women started. When she files for divorce, she exercises rights they died trying to claim. When she lives independently, she inhabits freedoms they could only imagine. When she owns property, earns money, makes choices, she does everything they were killed for attempting. She doesn't know their names, but she carries their torch. She doesn't know their stories, but she continues their struggle. She doesn't know their faces, but she fulfills their dreams. Every free woman is an unnamed medieval woman's prophecy fulfilled. Every choice we make freely is a prayer they prayed, answered centuries late, but answered nonetheless. We are their impossible hope realized. We are proof they were right to hope, right to run, right to die, rather than accept that women were property. They couldn't see us, but they saw truly. We exist because they insisted we should exist. We're free because they insisted freedom was worth everything. The medieval system that killed them is dying now, slowly, fighting viciously, but dying. Every year more women escape. Every generation more girls grow up free. Every decade, the medieval world loses more ground. It's not dead yet. It still has claws, still claims victims, still fights for survival. But it's losing. The trajectory is clear. The outcome is certain. It might take more centuries, but the medieval world will die. The women who died fighting it will win. Not in their lifetimes, but in ours, or our daughters, or their daughters. Someday, no woman anywhere will be property. Someday, leaving won't require courage, because it won't risk death. Someday, the medieval world will be truly history, not current events. That day will come because medieval women started walking toward it, even though they knew they'd never arrive. They started a journey measured in centuries, paid for in blood, but leading to freedom. We're still on that journey, still walking roads they died trying to travel, still fighting battles they lost, still claiming rights they couldn't name. But we're further along than they ever got. We can see destinations they could only dream of. We can reach freedoms they could only imagine. We are their dreams walking, their hopes breathing, their struggles succeeding. We are what they died believing was possible. The medieval runaway wives lost everything and won the future. They failed completely and succeeded ultimately. They died in misery and live in every free woman. They were erased from history and wrote themselves into eternity. They were nothing and became everything. They were property who insisted on being people. And slowly, painfully, eventually, they're winning that insistence. The world they died trying to reach is being born. It's not complete, not perfect, not universal. But it exists, and every day it exists more, spreads further, grows stronger. Every day, the medieval world weakens, and the world they imagined strengthens. Every woman who escapes abuse weakens the medieval world. Every girl who goes to school weakens it. Every law protecting female autonomy weakens it. Every mind that changes weakens it. Every generation that grows up with more freedom weakens it. Death by 1,000 cuts, inflicted by millions of women over centuries, slowly bleeding out a system that seemed immortal. The medieval world is dying, and medieval runaway wives struck the first blows. They didn't live to see it bleed, but they started the bleeding. And it hasn't stopped. It won't stop until the last chain breaks, the last law falls, the last mind changes, until every woman, everywhere, is free. Until the medieval world is not just dead, but impossible to resurrect. Until female autonomy is so normal, so universal, so unquestioned, that the idea of female property becomes incomprehensible. That day will come, not because it's inevitable, but because women keep fighting for it. Keep walking roads that medieval women died trying to travel. Keep claiming rights that medieval women died trying to imagine. Keep becoming what medieval women died believing was possible. The struggle that started with nameless women dying on muddy roads continues with named women changing the world. The revolution that began in silence continues in voices raised worldwide. The journey that started in death continues in life. Abundant, free, impossible life that medieval women died to make possible. Their bones are dust, but their dreams are diamond, indestructible, brilliant, cutting through centuries of darkness. They died, but what they died for didn't die with them. It lived, grew, spread, strengthened, until it became strong enough to start winning. And now, it is winning. Slowly, unevenly, incompletely, but winning. The medieval world that killed them is dying. The world they imagined is being born. They lost every battle, and they're winning the war. When we think of medieval women who left their husbands, we should think of them not as victims, but as veterans. The first soldiers in a war that's still being fought. They didn't have weapons, or training, or hope of victory. They just had the courage to say no, to walk away, to choose death over submission. They were the bravest people who ever lived, facing certain doom rather than accepting certain slavery. They were heroes whose names we'll never know, martyrs for a cause that didn't exist yet. They were revolutionaries before revolution was possible. They were feminists before feminism was conceived. They were human rights activists before human rights were invented. They were everything we are, just centuries early and infinitely braver. Because we have support, laws, shelters, options. They had nothing but the conviction that what was happening to them was wrong. And that conviction was enough to make them walk into certain death rather than accept it. That's not desperation. That's heroism, the kind of heroism that doesn't get songs or statues or recognition, the kind that dies alone and anonymous but changes the world anyway, the kind that plants seeds in winter and never sees spring but trusts it will come. They were that kind of heroes, the ones who start things they can't finish, who dream things they can't reach, who die for things that don't exist yet, who lose everything to win eventually. They were the greatest heroes no one's heard of, and we are their legacy. Every free woman is their victory parade. Every choice freely made is their medal of honor. Every door walked through is their monument. Every life lived in freedom is their eternal flame. They don't need names to be remembered. They live in every woman who refuses to be property. They don't need faces to be seen. They shine in every woman who claims her own light. They don't need voices to be heard. They speak through every woman who says no. They are not gone. They are everywhere, in every divorce filing, in every restraining order, in every shelter bed, in every woman walking away from what hurts her, in every girl who grows up knowing she owns herself, in every law that protects female autonomy, in every mind that understands women are human. They are more alive now than when they lived, more powerful than when they were powerless, more successful than when they failed. They lost their lives and won the future. The medieval world thought it erased them, but they wrote themselves into the source code of change. They became the invisible force that slowly, inevitably transformed everything. They were seeds that took centuries to bloom, but nothing could stop from growing. They were water that seemed to disappear, but carved channels that became rivers of change. They were the first drops of rain in a storm that's still building, still growing, still coming when it fully arrives, when the last remnants of the medieval world are washed away, when every woman everywhere is free. It will be because they started the rain. They brought the first drops with their blood, their tears, their lives. They started something that couldn't be stopped, even though it stopped them. They began a change that took centuries, but couldn't be prevented. They were the beginning of the end of the world that killed them. And that world is ending. Not ended, but ending. Every day ending a little more. Every year dying a little more. Every generation weaker than the last. The medieval world that seemed eternal is proving mortal. The system that seemed unbreakable is breaking. The prison that seemed inescapable has exits now. More every year. And women are walking through them by the millions, completing journeys that medieval women started. When the last woman walks free from the last prison of male ownership, she'll be completing a walk that started with medieval women stepping into certain death. When the last law falls that treats women as property, it will fall because medieval women started pushing. When the last mind changes that sees women as less than human, it will change because medieval women proved otherwise. They started everything by losing everything. They began freedom by accepting death. They created possibility by embracing impossibility. They were the most defeated people in history, and they're winning the longest war ever fought. They were nothing, and they're becoming everything. They were property, insisting on being pull. And slowly, finally, ultimately, they're succeeding. The medieval women who died trying to leave didn't fail. They just succeeded slowly. Their success took centuries to arrive, but it's arriving. Their victory was delayed, but not denied. Their deaths were not meaningless, but meaningful beyond measure. They died for the most important thing anyone can die for, the insistence that humans deserve to be free, that women are humans, that freedom is worth everything, even life itself. They died for principles they couldn't articulate, but felt in their bones. They died for futures they couldn't see, but somehow knew were possible. They died for us, though they didn't know we'd exist. And we live for them, though we don't know their names. We complete their journeys. We claim their rights. We inhabit their dreams. We are their resurrection, their vindication, their victory. We are proof they were right about everything. Right that the system was wrong. Right that women deserved freedom. Right that dying for it was worth it. Right that someday things would change. They couldn't see us, but they saw truly. We are what they saw, living, breathing, walking proof that their vision was accurate. We exist because they insisted we should exist. We're free because they insisted freedom was possible. We're human because they insisted on humanity. They gave us everything by losing everything. They saved us by not saving themselves. They freed us by accepting imprisonment. They created our world by rejecting theirs. The medieval runaway wives were the mothers of freedom we never knew. They birthed possibility with their blood. They nursed hope with their suffering. They raised revolution with their resistance. They were everything to us, though we know nothing about them. They gave us everything, though they had nothing to give but their lives. And they gave those, freely, completely, repeatedly, until the giving finally worked, until the deaths accumulated into change, until the suffering transformed into progress, until the failures added up to success, until the impossible became possible, then actual, then normal, until walking away from marriage became a right rather than a death sentence, until female autonomy became law rather than heresy, until women being human became fact rather than fantasy. All because they started the process with their deaths. They were the first and greatest feminists, though they'd never heard the word. They were the first human rights activists, though the concept didn't exist. They were the first freedom fighters in a war that still continues. They were everything we are, just centuries early and infinitely braver. And we are everything they dreamed, just delayed by centuries of systematic oppression. But the delay is ending. Their dreams are coming true. The world they died for is being born, finally, painfully, beautifully. It's not complete, not universal, not perfect, but it's real and growing and unstoppable. The medieval world fights back, tries to reverse progress, tries to push women back into cages. But it's fighting a losing battle against the force of history, against the momentum of centuries, against the accumulated power of millions of women who refuse to go backward. The medieval runaway wives started this momentum. They were the first push in a movement that's become an avalanche. They were the first voice in a chorus that's become a roar. They were the first step in a journey that's become a stampede. They were the beginning of the end of male supremacy, though they didn't live to see even the middle. But the end is coming. Not tomorrow, not next year, maybe not next century, but coming nonetheless, as certain as sunrise, as inevitable as spring, as unstoppable as time. The medieval world will die completely. Female freedom will win absolutely. Women will be human universally, not because it's destined, but because women keep fighting for it, keep dying for it when necessary, keep living for it when possible, keep pushing forward on roads that medieval women started walking, keep completing journeys they started, keep claiming victories they earned with blood. When that final victory comes, when the last woman walks free from the last cage of male ownership, she'll be walking on a road paved with the bones of medieval women who tried to walk it first. She'll be claiming freedom, purchased with their lives. She'll be human because they insisted humanity was possible. She won't know their names, but she'll be their daughter nonetheless, the daughter they died to create, the future they died to enable, the dream they died believing in. She'll be free because they chose death over slavery, proving freedom was worth everything. She'll be the answer to their desperate prayer, the fulfillment of their impossible hope, the justification for their sacrifice. She'll be everything they died trying to be. A woman who owns herself, who chooses her own life, who walks away from what harms her without risking death. She'll be ordinary by then, unremarkable, just another free woman in a world full of them. but she'll be a miracle to the bones that paved her road. She'll be impossible to the women who died, making her possible. She'll be everything to the nothing they were forced to be. And somewhere in her freedom, in her casual assumption of rights that cost so much blood, the ghosts of medieval runaway wives will finally rest. Their struggle will be complete. Their deaths will be redeemed. Their dreams will be reality. The world they died trying to reach will exist completely. And in that world, no woman will ever again face the choice between submission and death. No woman will die trying to leave. No woman will be property. The medieval world will be truly dead, and the world they imagined will be fully born. That's the world we're building on their bones. That's the future we're creating with their sacrifice. That's the victory we're winning with battles they lost. We are their revenge on the world that killed them. We are their triumph over the system that crushed them. We are their resurrection, their vindication, their eternal life. We are medieval runaway wives who survived because they didn't, and we will not let their deaths be meaningless. We will complete what they started. We will claim what they died trying to reach. We will become what they died believing was possible. We will be free because they proved freedom was worth dying for. We will be human because they insisted on humanity. We will own ourselves because they refused to be owned. We will live the lives they died trying to live. And when we do, when every woman everywhere is free, when the medieval world is nothing but a cautionary tale, when female autonomy is as unquestionable as breathing, we will remember them, the nameless women who died on muddy roads, the forgotten wives who chose death over submission, the erased rebels who started the revolution that took centuries to win. We will remember that our freedom was paid for in blood, that our rights were purchased with lives, that our humanity was claimed by women who were denied their own. We will remember the price, honor the payment, and guard the purchase. We will never go back to the world they died trying to leave. We will never again be property. We will never forget that freedom requires vigilance, that rights can be revoked, that progress can reverse. We will remember the medieval runaway wives in every choice we freely make, and we will be worthy of their sacrifice. We will use the freedom they died to create. We will claim the humanity they died to establish. We will live the lives they died believing were possible. We will be everything they couldn't be, and in being it, we will prove they were right about everything. Right to run, right to resist, right to die rather than submit, right to believe freedom was possible, even when it wasn't. The medieval women who left their husbands and died for it weren't just leaving bad marriages. They were leaving the entire structure of female oppression. They were rejecting not just individual men, but male supremacy itself. They were insisting not just on personal freedom, but on female humanity. They were claiming not just their own lives, but the lives of every woman who would come after. They failed in their own time, but succeeded in ours. They lost their lives, but won the future. They died in the medieval world, but live in every free woman. They were defeated, but ultimately victorious. They were nothing, but became everything. They were property who insisted on being people And finally, centuries later, they are. We are. Because they insisted we could be. When you see a woman walking away from what hurts her, remember she walks on ancient roads. When you see a woman claiming her rights, remember those rights were paid for in blood. When you see a woman living freely, remember that freedom cost everything to women who had nothing. Remember the medieval runaway wives, not as victims, but as founders. Founders of female freedom. First citizens of the world we're still building. Pioneers who died exploring territories we now inhabit. Martyrs who died for faiths that hadn't been invented yet. Heroes whose names we'll never know, but whose legacy we live. They were the beginning of everything we are. The first draft of every free woman. The rough sketch of every feminist. The prototype of every woman who insists on her own humanity. They were us, just too early. And we are them, just in time. In time to complete their journeys. In time to claim their victories. In time to live their dreams. In time to be what they died, believing was possible. We are their time arrived. Their future realized. Their impossibility made real. We are medieval runaway wives who survived because they didn't. Who succeeded because they failed. Who live because they died. We are their resurrection and their revenge. Their vindication and their victory. Their prophecy fulfilled. We are free because they died, insisting freedom was possible. We are human because they died, insisting on humanity. We are everything because they died rather than remain nothing. They gave us everything by losing everything. And we honor them by never forgetting the price, never taking freedom for granted, never going back to the world they died to leave. The medieval women who left their husbands and died for it are not gone. They live in every free woman. They speak through every woman who says no. They walk with every woman who leaves what harms her. They triumph in every woman who claims her own life. They are more alive now than when they lived, more successful than when they failed, more powerful than when they were powerless. They are the immortal dead, living forever in freedoms they died to create. They are the defeated victors, winning through centuries of patient dying. They are the nameless named, known by their legacy rather than their identities. They are the nothing that became everything, the property that became people, the dead who gave life. They are the mothers of freedom we never knew, and we are the daughters they died to birth. Their blood is our ink, writing laws that free women. Their bones are our foundation, supporting structures that protect women. Their deaths are our lives, lived freely because they couldn't. Their dreams are our reality, inhabited because they imagined. Their journey is our destination, reached because they started walking. They are the beginning that made our present possible, and we are the future they died believing in. When the last cage breaks and the last woman walks free, she will complete a walk that started in medieval times, started with women who knew they wouldn't survive, but walked anyway, who knew they couldn't win, but fought anyway, who knew they would die, but chose anyway, chose freedom over safety, chose death over slavery, chose Possibility over certainty chose to be the beginning of something they'd never see completed. They started the longest walk in history, from property to personhood, from slavery to freedom, from death to life. We're still walking it, but we're almost there. Almost at the destination they died trying to reach. Almost at the freedom they died believing in. Almost at the humanity they died insisting on. Almost at the world they died to create. And when we arrive, when every woman is free, when the medieval world is truly dead, when female humanity is unquestionable, we will have completed their journey. We will have claimed their victory. We will have justified their sacrifice. We will have proved they were right about everything. Right that freedom was worth dying for. Right that women deserved humanity. Right that the system was wrong. Right that change was possible, even when it seemed impossible. They saw the future through centuries of darkness and died walking toward it. We live in the light they died believing in. We are their vision realized, their hope fulfilled, their sacrifice redeemed. We are medieval runaway wives who finally made it, who finally escaped, who finally survived, who finally won. We won because they lost everything to begin the winning. We're free because they died to start the freeing. We're human because they insisted humanity was possible. We're everything they died trying to be. And in being it, we complete their being. We close the circle they opened. We finish the journey they started. We claim the victory they earned. We become what they died, believing we could become. Free women in a free world, walking roads they paved with their bones, living lives they purchased with their deaths, being human because they proved humanity was worth everything. We are their monument, their memory, their meaning. We are why they mattered, why their deaths weren't meaningless, why their suffering served purpose. We are the answer to their desperate question. Will it ever change? Yes, it changed. Yes, it's changing. Yes, it will continue changing until the last prison falls and the last woman walks free. Until the medieval world is ancient history and female freedom is universal present. Until what they died for becomes so normal, we forget it was once impossible. But we won't forget them. The women who made it possible by dying for it. The wives who ran knowing they'd never arrive. The rebels who fought knowing they'd never win. The humans who insisted on humanity knowing it would kill them. We won't forget, because forgetting would dishonor their sacrifice, endanger our freedom, enable the medieval world's return. We remember them in every free step we take, every choice we make, every life we create. We remember them not with monuments or names, but with lives lived freely, because that's what they died for. Not glory or recognition, but the simple possibility that someday women would be free, would be human, would be able to leave, would be able to live, would be able to choose. That possibility is reality now, built on their bones, paid with their blood, created by their courage. We are that possibility realized. We are those bones risen. We are that blood redeemed. We are that courage vindicated. We are medieval runaway wives who finally made it home. Not to the homes they left, but to the home they died trying to find. The home where women are human. Where leaving doesn't mean dying. Where freedom is birthright, not death sentence. Where the medieval world is memory, not reality, where what they died for is what we live. That home exists now, incomplete, but expanding, built by women who continue their work, inhabited by women who complete their journeys, defended by women who remember their sacrifice, extended by women who refuse to go backward. It's the home they imagined when they had no homes, the shelter they dreamed when they had no shelter, the safety they envisioned when they had no safety, the freedom they believed in when they had no freedom. We live in their impossible dream made possible. We inhabit their fantasy made fact. We embody their vision made flesh. We are their afterlife, not in heaven, but on earth, not in spirit, but in body, not in memory, but in reality. We are medieval runaway wives, resurrected in every woman who walks free, reborn in every woman who chooses her life, reincarnated in every woman who owns herself. They're not dead. They live in us, in our freedoms, our choices, our refusals, in our ability to leave, to live, to be. They are more alive now than when they breathed, more present than when they walked, more real than when they existed. Because now their dreams exist, their hopes breathe, their vision walks, their impossible is possible, their death is life. They won. Through centuries of dying, they won. Through millennia of suffering, they won. Through eternities of patience, they won. The medieval world that killed them is dying. The freedom they died for is living. The humanity they insisted on is recognized. The victory they started is completing. They won everything by losing everything. Gain the future by sacrificing the present. Created tomorrow by destroying today. They were the most defeated people in history, and they defeated history itself, changed its course, redirected its flow, transformed its destination. They turned history from the story of female slavery to the story of female freedom. From the narrative of oppression to the narrative of liberation. From the tale of property to the tale of personhood. They rewrote the human story by refusing to accept the script, by walking off the stage, even though it killed them, by insisting on different endings, even though they never saw them. They were the editors of fate, the revisers of reality, the authors of alternatives. They wrote our freedom with their blood, scripted our humanity with their suffering, authored our autonomy with their anguish. We are their book, finally published after centuries of revision. We are their story, finally told after millennia of silence. We are their voice, finally heard after eternities of muteness. We speak words they couldn't speak, tell truths they couldn't tell, claim rights they couldn't claim, name crimes they couldn't name. We are their mouths finally opening, their tongues finally loosened, their screams finally heard. We scream their screams, but transformed into songs. We cry their tears, but transformed into triumph. We bleed their blood, but transformed into birth. We die their deaths, but transformed into life. We are their metamorphosis, their evolution, their revolution completed. We are what they were becoming through dying, what they were creating through suffering, what they were building through destroying. We are their architecture of freedom, built on foundations of sacrifice, their engineering of equality constructed from components of courage, their design of dignity drawn in blood. We inhabit structures they imagined, but never entered, live in spaces they conceived, but never saw, breathe in atmospheres they dreamed, but never experienced. We are their architecture realized, their engineering completed, their design constructed. We stand in the freedom they sketched with their lives, occupy the equality they blueprinted with their bodies, inhabit the dignity they drafted with their deaths. We are their plans made real, their visions made solid, their dreams made dwelling. And from these dwellings, we continue building, adding rooms they couldn't imagine, installing windows they couldn't conceive, opening doors they didn't know were possible, extending their architecture into futures they couldn't foresee. We build on their bones, but we build higher than they could dream, wider than they could envision, stronger than they could hope. We are their foundation, but we are also their skyward reach, their underground becoming above ground, their burial becoming resurrection, their ending becoming beginning. We begin where they ended, but we don't end where they began. We transcend their limits while honoring their sacrifice, exceed their dreams while acknowledging their nightmares, surpass their achievements while remembering their suffering. We are their more, their beyond, their further. We are what they were, plus what they couldn't be. We are their actual plus their potential. Their real plus their possible. There was plus there could be. We are mathematics of freedom, where they were the first equation, the initial calculation, the primary proof that freedom was possible, even when the arithmetic seemed impossible. They proved that 0 could become 1, that nothing could become something, that property could become person, that death could become life. They were the prime numbers of revolution, indivisible except by themselves, the fundamental digits of change, the essential integers of progress, the basic arithmetic of female freedom. And we are their advanced calculus, their complex equations, their sophisticated mathematics. We compute freedoms they could only count, calculate possibilities they could only estimate, solve problems they could only pose. We are their questions answered, their hypotheses proven, their theories realized. We are their science perfected, their experiments completed, their research concluded. We discovered what they died trying to find. We proved what they died trying to demonstrate. We know what they died trying to learn. That women are human, that freedom is possible, that leaving can lead to living, that the medieval world was wrong about everything. We have the proof they died trying to gather, the evidence they died trying to present, the testimony they died trying to give. We are their case closed, their verdict rendered, their justice finally served. After centuries of deliberation, the judgment is in. They were right. Right to run, right to resist, right to refuse, right to die rather than accept that women were property. The medieval world was wrong, and they were right. History vindicates them. Progress proves them. Freedom validates them. We verify them with every breath we freely take, every choice we freely make, every step we freely walk. We are their vindication made visible, their verification made vital, their validation made vivid. We prove them with our presence, demonstrate them with our existence, evidence them with our being. We are their proven theorem, their confirmed hypothesis, their verified theory. We are their peer review, their replication, their scientific certainty. They hypothesized freedom, and we prove it. They theorized humanity, and we demonstrate it. They imagined possibility, and we actualize it. We are their imagination made actual, their theory made practice, their hypothesis made reality. We are their dream made day, their night made light, their darkness made dawn. We are their sunrise after centuries of midnight, their spring after millennia of winter, their warmth after eternities of cold. We thaw what they froze trying to survive. We bloom what they planted in permafrost. We harvest what they sowed in impossible soil. We are their seasonal turn, their climate change, their weather transformed. We are their atmosphere altered, their environment evolved, their ecosystem revolutionized. We breathe air they couldn't breathe, drink water they couldn't drink, eat food they couldn't eat, not because the elements changed, but because we can access them, can claim them, can own them. We have access they were denied, claims they couldn't make, ownership they couldn't achieve. We possess what possessed them, own what owned them, control what controlled them. We are their reversal, their inversion, their revolution, in the literal sense of turning around. We turned around what they were forced to face. We face forward while they face backward. We see futures while they saw only walls. We perceive possibilities while they perceived only prisons. We are their perception corrected, their vision cleared, their sight restored. We see what they were blinded from seeing, observe what they were prevented from observing, witness what they were forbidden from witnessing. We are their eyes finally opened, their gaze finally lifted, their focus finally free. We look where they couldn't look, watch what they couldn't watch, see what they couldn't see, that women are fully human, that freedom is birthright, that leaving is possible, that the medieval world was a lie. We see its falseness with clarity they died trying to achieve. We recognize its deception with understanding they died trying to gain. We know its invalidity with certainty they died trying to reach. We are their knowledge realized, their understanding achieved, their certainty confirmed. We know what they knew but couldn't prove, understand what they understood but couldn't express, are certain of what they were certain but couldn't demonstrate. We are their knowing made known, their understanding made understood, their certainty made certain. We prove what they knew in their bones, express what they felt in their hearts, demonstrate what they believed in their souls, that freedom was possible even when it wasn't, that humanity was inherent even when it was denied, that leaving was right even when it was death. They knew these truths with a certainty that survived everything. Survived the laws saying they were wrong, survived the church saying they were damned, survived the culture saying they were evil, survived the world saying they should die. Their certainty survived even their own deaths, passed through centuries unchanged, reached us intact and vindicated, proved right by time and progress, and the simple fact that we exist. We exist because they were certain we could exist. We are free because they were certain freedom was possible. We are human because they were certain of humanity. Their certainty was stronger than any system designed to break it, more enduring than any structure built to contain it, more persistent than any force deployed against it. Their certainty was the seed that became our forest, the spark that became our fire, the drop that became our ocean. We are their certainty multiplied, their conviction amplified, their belief actualized. We are what they were certain of, finally made, certainly real, finally proved, beyond doubt, finally established as fact, that women deserve freedom, that leaving should be possible, that humanity isn't gendered, that the medieval world was wrong about everything. These are no longer beliefs, but facts, no longer hopes, but realities, no longer dreams, but daily experience. For us, though not yet for all women, not yet everywhere, not yet completely, but more than ever before, more than they could have imagined, more than they dared to dream. We have more than they believed possible, while believing everything was possible. We exceed their wildest hopes, while fulfilling their basic demands. We surpass their imagination, while completing their simple insistence that women are human. We are their paradox resolved, their impossibility made possible, their fantasy made fact, their death made life. We resolve what they posed, answer what they asked, solve what they presented. We are their resolution, their answer, their solution. We fix what they showed was broken, heal what they revealed was wounded, repair what they proved was damaged. We are their diagnosis treated, their illness cured, their injury healed. We are medicine they died trying to create, treatment they died trying to develop, cure they died trying to discover. They were the disease identifying itself, the wound naming its pain, the break locating its fracture. They diagnosed patriarchy by dying from it, identified oppression by suffering under it, named slavery by trying to escape it. They were the symptoms that revealed the disease, the fever that indicated infection, the pain that located injury, and we are the healing they died to make possible, the recovery they suffered to enable, the health they sacrificed to create. We are their wellness after centuries of sickness, their strength after millennia of weakness, their power after eternities of powerlessness. We stand because they fell, run because they crawled, fly because they couldn't walk. We are their mobility restored, their movement enabled, their motion freed. We go where they couldn't go, travel where they couldn't travel, journey where they couldn't journey. We complete trips they started, reach destinations they departed for, arrive where they aimed. We are their arrival after centuries of departure, their destination after millennia of journey. They're there after eternities of trying to get there. We are there, in the place they died trying to reach, the space they suffered trying to find, the location they sacrificed trying to achieve. We occupy their aspiration, inhabit their ambition, reside in their reaching. We live where they died trying to live, exist where they ceased trying to exist, are where they weren't allowed to be. We are their being finally being, their existence finally existing, their life finally living. We live the lives they died trying to live. Not perfect lives, but possible lives. Not complete lives, but chosen lives. Not easy lives, but our own lives. Lives where leaving doesn't mean dying. Where choosing doesn't mean suffering. Where being doesn't mean belonging to someone else. We own our own being, possess our own bodies, control our own choices, direct our own lives, decide our own fates, determine our own futures. All because they insisted such ownership was possible, even when it cost them everything to insist. We are their insistence, insisted into reality. Their demand, demanded into existence. their claim claimed into fact. We have what they claimed, but couldn't have. Own what they demanded, but couldn't own. Are what they insisted, but couldn't be. We are their impossible insistence made possible, their illegal demand made legal, their heretical claim made orthodox. We normalized what they were killed for suggesting, legalized what they were punished for wanting, sanctified what they were damned for claiming. We are their heresy become orthodoxy, their crime become right, their sin become virtue, their evil become good, their wrong become correct, their deviation become standard. We standardized freedom. They were murdered for seeking. Normalized humanity. They were tortured for claiming. Routinized rights. They were executed for wanting. We made boring what they died trying to make possible. Made mundane what they suffered trying to make real. Made ordinary what they sacrificed trying to make exist. The freedom they died for is now so common, we forget it was once impossible. So normal, we forget it was once heretical. So ordinary, we forget it was once worth dying for. But they didn't forget, couldn't forget. The impossibility was their daily reality. The heresy was their only hope. The thing worth dying for was their only escape. They lived the impossibility we've made possible, suffered the heresy we've made orthodox, died for what we've made ordinary. They were the extraordinary becoming ordinary through centuries of dying. The impossible becoming possible through millennia of suffering. The heretical becoming orthodox through eternities of sacrifice. We are their transformation complete, their metamorphosis finished, their evolution achieved. We evolved from property to person through their mutation, from object to subject through their variation, from thing to being through their selection. They were the evolutionary pressure that created us, the selective force that shaped us, the adaptive challenge that formed us. We adapted to freedom through their constraint, to choice through their choicelessness, to humanity through their dehumanization. We are their adaptation successful, their evolution complete, their selection survived. We survived what they didn't survive, endured what they couldn't endure, lasted what they couldn't last, not because we're stronger, but because they weakened the system. Not because we're braver, but because they absorbed the danger. Not because we're better, but because they made better possible. We stand on their shoulders, though their shoulders are dust. Rise on their sacrifice, though their sacrifice is forgotten. Succeed through their failure, though their failure is erased. We are their erasure written back into history, their forgetting remembered, their silence spoken, their absence made present, their nothing made something, their invisibility made visible. We make visible what they were made invisible for being, make speakable what they were silenced for saying, make possible what they were killed for attempting. We are their attempt, attempted successfully, their tried triumphantly, their effort, efforted effectively. We effect what they tried to effect, achieve what they attempted to achieve, accomplish what they endeavored to accomplish. We are their endeavor ended in success, their attempt arrived at achievement, their try transformed to triumph. We triumph where they were defeated, win where they lost, succeed where they failed, live where they died, continue where they ended, begin where they stopped. We are their stopping started again, their ending begun anew, their death made life, Their conclusion made commencement. We commence what they concluded, initiate what they terminated, institute what they couldn't constitute. We are their institution instituted, their constitution constituted, their establishment established. We establish what they died trying to establish, found what they died trying to found, create what they died trying to create. A world where women are human, where leaving is legal, where freedom is possible, where the medieval world is history. We created their vision, though they never saw it completed, built their dream, though they never saw it built, made their reality, though they never saw it real. We are their unseen seen, their unbuilt built, their unreal real, their undone done, their unfinished finished, their uncompleted completed. We complete them by being complete ourselves, finish them by being finished, do them by being done with what trapped them. We are done with being property, though they couldn't be done with it, finished with being owned, though they couldn't finish it, complete in our humanity, though they couldn't complete theirs. We are their incompletion completed, their unfinished business finished, their interrupted lives continued. We continue what they couldn't continue, persist where they couldn't persist, endure where they couldn't endure, last where they couldn't last. We are their lasting at last, their endurance enduring, their persistence persisting. We persist through their inability to persist, endure through their failure to endure, last through their not lasting. We are their stamina extended, their breath continued, their heartbeat sustained. We beat with hearts they stopped beating, breathe with lungs they stopped breathing, live with lives they stopped living. We are their vital signs revived, their pulse resumed, their animation reanimated. We animate what they couldn't animate, move what they couldn't move, live what they couldn't live. We are their life lived after death, their existence existing after extinction, their being after ceasing. We ceased to be property because they ceased to be, stopped being owned because they were stopped, ended enslavement because they ended. We are their ending ended and begun again. Their stopping stopped and started anew. Their ceasing ceased and continued. We continue their discontinuation, extend their extension, prolong their prolonging. We are their prolonged struggle finally succeeding, their extended effort finally achieving, their protracted battle finally winning. We win what they fought, achieve what they attempted, succeed what they struggled for. We are their struggle's success, their fight's victory, their battle's triumph.